what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and yes, I am back. So I did post just earlier this week a video talking to you guys about my weekend with going to the Twisted concert and doing some stuff at home, and yeah, I'm really excited. I was planning on actually doing this video, I think recording it the day before I actually recorded this, but unfortunately for the last couple of days my mental health hasn't exactly been the best and I was feeling really sick. I feel better now. Today actually I feel a little bit better after having gone through a kind of a rough day. I took a nap, had some comfort food, and I am back to pretty much my normal self, so that's really good. And I think the rest of this week's gonna go pretty easy because all I have tomorrow is just to work, and then it's finals time, and then I get to go home for 3 weeks, which I'm very excited about. So I did find out, unfortunately, right before I left for home this past weekend that a family member of mine did pass away that I haven't really known much my whole life. We are going to have to leave to go up north on Friday, and I will be gone pretty much all of Saturday, so I won't be posting any videos right away after I get back from college, but I will be going home on Thursday, and I may be able to get something recorded. I don't know. It's going to kind of have to depend on how things go. I won't be posting much probably actually until about middle of the next week because I may even be going up to see Robert for a couple of days at his campus, but I do have some stuff that I will be in the works of. For instance, I will be doing a 24-hour readathon on Thursday the 14th, and I should have it edited hopefully actually over the weekend and maybe be able to post it. This is going to be a quite long video because I do have a lot of books that I need to wrap up because I haven't done a book review in I think over 2 months, and let me actually double check that real quick. Okay, correction, I haven't done a book review in a month, and that last one was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So it's been a little while, and so I have read a lot of books since reading Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets that I did want to talk about because a lot of them were actually really good. But basically end of October and November I read a lot of good books. I don't really know how many I read. Let me see. So I read a total of 9 books and DNF'd 1 book over the last month or so since I last posted a video, and so I do want to tell you guys all about them and give you basically kind of small book reviews as to what they are because I don't have the time to sit and record all of those book reviews for you guys. The first book I read is the book Dorothy Must Die by Daniel Page. This is the first book in Daniel Page's series dealing with essentially a retelling and continuation of the story of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Now this one basically talks about a troubled teen named Amy Gum who is taken by a tornado from Kansas into the world of Oz and finds out that a lot of things have happened since Dorothy left and then eventually returned to Oz. Essentially everything is thrown into darkness and Dorothy has become a very, very evil kind of queen, and so Amy is told that because of the fact that she has now arrived there, she is the one that is supposed to kill Dorothy and put things back in order in Oz. I gave this book 5 stars out of 5 because I could not stop reading this book. I absolutely ate it up. It was so well written in my opinion, and I really loved the way that the story was continued with The Wizard of Oz because The Wizard of Oz is one of my favorite stories from when I was a kid. I loved watching the movie a lot when I was really young. It was more of a focus on the actual journey itself. And because of that, there was no real major romantic relationship involved. There was a romance in it, but it was very strained, which I actually really enjoyed in the story, which a lot of people I know had a bit of a problem with when it came to the book. But honestly, the romantic relationship that was involved in the story between Amy and another character was way more realistic to me than I think if they had actually had a very easygoing relationship. The magic system was also really, really interesting because all of the witches that were involved with it really had interesting different magical powers that they were able to exemplify over the course of the novel. There are several witches that are healers. There are some that do kind of more disguising and things of that nature, which I thought was so cool to see that each witch had almost a very different kind of power and ability, which I think is way more interesting than having every witch having the same powers and abilities as the next. I also really, really loved how the main character Amy was a very strong character, but she was also very unsure and uncertain of a lot of things that were going on. Because of having been thrust into this new environment and not exactly knowing what is going on, it is clear that any person in that situation would be really kind of hesitant as to what is going on. But despite that, she ends up becoming this really strong character by finding out where her place is and essentially figuring out how she needs to go about things in order to do what is right in her mind. And I really enjoyed that because I feel that a lot of the times with these chosen one tropes, a lot of the main characters are so uncertain that they have no idea where to go to, and it takes them forever to find out what it is that they have to do. But I did have some problems with it because I still don't really know why certain people are able to come to Oz. That's never really established in the book. It doesn't explain how Dorothy was picked. It doesn't explain how Amy was picked to come to Oz. There's really no clear explanation of that, and I wish that that would have been explained more, but it is possible that it is explained more in the next book. I just wish that it may have been kind of explained at least a little bit in the first one, just so that we can understand kind of how the process is starting to be seen in terms of who gets to come to Oz that is from the outside world. The second one was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I got this book like the day that it came out because I had to go to the store for something and I realized that it was there and I needed to get it like right away because I was so excited to read this book. I ended up giving this book 5 out of 5 stars, and if you're not familiar with what Turtles All the Way Down is about, it basically centers around this main character Asa, who is diagnosed with OCD and a anxiety disorder, and essentially a lot of the book talks about those things and how she lives with them. A kind of side story to that though is that she and her best friend find out about this billionaire that has gone missing, and there's a huge reward out for any information about him and where he may be, and it turns out that this is also the father of an old childhood friend of Asa's that she's able to reconnect with in this story, and a lot of the story centers around her anxieties and her OCD tendencies and how that kind of plays into the relationships she has with different characters, including her best friend and this boy that she's reconnecting with, along with several other characters like her mother and several other friends and things of that nature. I cannot speak for the OCD rep particularly, but I can speak for the anxiety rep. The anxiety rep that is put in this book is exactly how my anxiety works, where in the story, Asa has a lot of spiraling thoughts where basically one nugget of a thought can turn into this giant tornado of thoughts that are so destructive and that cause her to go into essential panic attacks. And that is exactly how my anxiety works, and I thought that it was really well represented in that sense. Again, I can't speak for the OCD rep because I don't believe I have OCD essentially, but I have heard a lot of people say that have read this book that the OCD rep is very, very well done, and that does not surprise me as this is an own voices novel because John Green himself has OCD and an anxiety disorder coupled with that. Mental health is one of those things where it's not always really well represented in books, and I feel like more and more today, especially in YA contemporary novels, we are finding that mental health is becoming a bigger focus in terms of it not being really anything that defines a character, but it is basically something that is kind of alongside and helps to kind of define a little bit of some of the characters' mindsets, but they also kind of try to live with it in terms of everything else that is going on. The one thing though that I did not like about this book, and I think it was intentional, is the best friend. I absolutely hated the best friend in this book because she's very insensitive to Asa's feelings and to the things that Asa experiences, and she's very controlling of the relationship. She's whiny, she's unsupportive, she never really listens to Asa in terms of anything she has to say, and the sad thing is I think that is more often true when it comes to people who are friends with people that don't have mental illness. I grew up with a lot of friends that did have some kind of a mental illness growing up, so we were always able to connect, but a lot of people I've also met in my life who don't have mental illnesses don't really understand how things work for people with mental illnesses. They don't understand why their minds think in certain ways and why they can't just calm down or, you know, just relax or chill out. And I really like the fact, though, that John Green incorporated this character because it's definitely something that we have to make a conversation about in terms of basically teaching and giving education to people without mental illnesses about people with mental illnesses so that we are able to connect better with the problems that are being faced between these two groups of people. The next book I listened to on audiobook, and it is called Magic by Angie Sage, which is the first book in the Septimus Heap series. Now, this was a series I remember growing up had a lot of traction with it. A lot of people really enjoyed it, and it was actually one of the first novels I'd heard about that it got me into kind of the fantasy genre. Like, I never read it as a kid, but that was one of the books I remember specifically that I had wanted to read. Now, however, the plot of it is not super clear, which is one of the big problems I had with it. Basically, what's happening is there is the birth of a child named Septimus Heap, who is the seventh son of a seventh son, which is like the most powerful being in any fantasy world. And then at the same time, there is the birth of a girl who is the princess to this kingdom, and she is taken away from the kingdom as her family is being murdered and is brought to this family, and they are told that they have to take care of this child. And then all kinds of craziness ensues after that. There's just so many different layers incorporated in the story with different characters and different plot lines that it's so hard to keep them all straight, which is one of the huge problems that I had with this book, is the fact that I could not really figure out who was supposed to be the main plot. I think the main plot was supposed to be that there's this young girl who is being targeted because of her family and she has to escape. The things that I did like about it, though, was that I really liked the magic system involved in it because it was a very select system. Not everyone is born with magical abilities, and so you kind of have to be able to compete to become an apprentice for this wizard who is supposed to have all of these powers. Once you are selected as the apprentice by the wizard, which is called the extraordinary wizard, you essentially will learn under them all of the powers you will need to help run the kingdom, and then you are kind of, once the extraordinary wizard dies, you take their place and you assume an apprentice and all these things. So I really like that magic system because it's a little different than what I had heard from other stories where people are born with powers. Some in this case, in this story, are, but I feel that more of them were not born with magical abilities and had to learn it, because some of the Heap family did not have powers, whereas the father figure did at some point but never used them and has essentially lost that ability. So it seems that this is a magic system where you have to kind of train yourself to use your powers, which is really, really interesting. It definitely is nothing I have really heard of before. However, one other huge thing I didn't like about it was the entire third person narration of the story. I just really didn't like it. I found myself actually falling asleep to the audiobook many times because I found it to be so dry and really not anything I was expecting. So I really didn't care for it. So I only gave it 2 stars. As you guys know, I am currently rereading the Harry Potter series. I did read and finish The Prisoner of Azkaban, the 3rd book in the Harry Potter series, and let me just say, it was just as good this time as it was when I was younger and I read it. I remember specifically reading this book when I was a lot younger, and I just loved it. I gave it 5 stars. Now, honestly, this is my favorite story in the entire Harry Potter franchise because of a lot of different reasons. I really like the aspect of Harry being able to find a family member that, or at least a godfather, someone who knew his family that he could rely on. And this is like one of the first movies in the franchise, and one of the first books specifically, that shows that things are starting to get a lot darker, especially when we find out about Peter Pettigrew and his role in the whole history of what happened to Harry's parents, and the fact that Sirius was blamed for all of these happening. I also, love the scene with Hermione punching Draco in the face, the scene with Buckbeak. Hagrid's whole thing with being a new teacher was so heartwarming because the kids were trying to be so nice to him, but he was just miserably failing, and I felt bad, but I was also like, good on you guys for actually doing something and trying to make him feel involved. The most problems I had was with the adaptation of the movie specifically, because I really wish that there would have been more of an insight into Hermione's kind of mindset as the 3rd book goes on, because in this book we learn about the time turners, which is something that she uses to get from all of her classes, because she has essentially booked herself so thinly that she essentially starts having anxiety because of it, because she can't get a lot of the things that she needs done. She's overworked, she's overstressed, and the time turner is supposed to help her with it, but even with the time turner, things seem to be escalating at a very high level for her. And I wish that the movie specifically would have played more into that, because that sets up a lot for Hermione in the future, especially when it comes to Goblet of Fire, but it does show us a lot into her personality that the movie didn't really ever capture, which I've always kind of hated about the movies, because they focus so much on Harry, which is the point, because it's all about, his learning about, the wizarding world and finding out more about his family. But there's still a huge focus on the other characters in the books that is never represented in the movies, and it makes me really sad. So the next book that I read, I actually DNF'd for the first time, I think, since I was 11 years old. This is the first book I've actually said, I cannot finish reading this book. And that is Blackheath by Gabriella Lepore. So this was a book that I was sent by Off Tomes Publishing for the month of November, and I really did not like it. I really don't think I like Gabriella Lepore's writing, because as you guys know, I did read her book, Witches of the Glass Castle, in October, and I just do not like her writing at all. I don't even know what the story was supposed to be about, so I'm gonna go on my Goodreads app and try to see if I can find the synopsis, because I didn't even understand what was going on in the book. So the synopsis that's on Goodreads says, 17-year-old Maggie Elms is dogged by a case of chronic bad luck. She figures that it's just her lot in life. That is until the psychic at Blackheath's annual carnival reveals that Maggie's problems are caused by more than just ordinary misfortune. She's actually been cursed. Desperate to shake the hex, Maggie has no choice but to seek out the help of Joel Tomlins, a rebellious classmate who's descended from the Blackheath's most powerful line of witches. After breaking all of his coven's conventions to help her, Joel discovers that the curse isn't as bad as Maggie fears. In fact, it's much, much worse. Now, I kind of got that from what I had read of the book, that there was this huge idea of there being a curse on this character, but I really didn't feel that that was as important as it should have been. Like, I didn't feel that there was really any stakes involved in this, because I didn't see this character having really any bad luck from what I remember of reading it. And honestly, I just thought it was an interesting premise of the story, but it was so poorly executed. Gabrielle Lepore writes very fast-paced. Now, that's okay in some instances, but if the whole novel is so fast-paced that I don't even know what goes on in a scene of a book, there's a problem. And I really did not like it. I thought the story was very unimpressive. I thought things were moving way too fast. Nothing was grabbing my attention in the book, and I just didn't understand the characters' motivations or their backgrounds at all. So unfortunately, I did DNF this book. I didn't rate it. I really just did not care for it at all. If her writing does change at all, though, in her other novels, please let me know down in the comments below if you've read anything else of hers, because I'm willing to give her another chance if you guys think that her actual writing has changed. The next book I read was another audiobook, and it was the book Witch and Wizard by James Patterson and Gabrielle Charbonnet. This is the first novel in the Witch and Wizard series, and I was way more impressed with it than I thought I was going to be, and I gave it somewhere between a 3 and a 4 stars. I wasn't exactly sure where to give it because there were some problems I had with it, but overall I did like it a lot, enough to where I want to read the next book. And this was the series by James Patterson that I had heard of a lot. My younger sister read it and said that it was pretty good, but I just never got around to actually reading it, and so I saw it on Amazon for a really cheap price on audiobook, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna actually get it and listen to it. The story focuses on these siblings named Wit and Wisty, who are essentially condemned to death for being witches, which is something they have no idea that they even are. But they soon find out that they actually do have powers, and they are going to be sentenced to death because of it. And so basically, this is a story of them trying to escape and figure out what the heck is going on with them, and how did they get these powers, and who exactly are they? Like, it's a lot of self-discovery in this novel, which I really, really enjoyed, as these are both characters who are in their late teens, almost out of high school, and they're kind of having to figure out who they are in order to understand how they fit in the world with being a witch and a wizard. So the novel is split between both Wit and Wisty's perspectives, and I really enjoyed that. I really liked seeing the perspective for both Wit and Wisty because there's different stakes involved for both of them. Wit, you find out, actually has a former girlfriend who was also taken into custody by this new world order that is getting rid of all magical beings or delinquents, and we don't really know what happens to her, and so a lot of the story is him trying to find out how he can find her and get back to her, while also finding out about the fact that he is a wizard. And a lot of the story for Wisty is trying to figure out how to harness her powers and being able to kind of deal with it. I thought the story was very engaging, very well paced, didn't feel it was too fast in any parts. I felt that it was actually really well done in terms of the pacing. It's one of the things I love the most about James Patterson is his ability to really pace a story. The magic system was also really interesting because Wit and Wisty had no idea that they had these powers until it came to the point where they were so fearful of what was going on that Wisty had essentially set herself on fire. And I think that's a very interesting way to bring in a kind of magic system, is to only bring it in when it is actually so matured enough to where even an extreme emotion is able to bring it out of a person. Although that kind of does lead to some problems, because if she was a kid, wouldn't that have shown up more? But there were a couple of scenes that I felt were just a smidge too quick. I would have liked to have seen some scenes, especially the action ones, be drawn out a lot more, just because there's so much that's going on, and I wish there would have been a little bit more to do with it. But those were mostly towards the end of the book, and I really didn't get much of a magic system from Wit, and I wonder if that's because he doesn't have the ability to harness his powers very much, and I wonder if that's going to be a huge point in one of the future books in the series. But we definitely had a huge amount of focus on Wisty's power and her ability and her being able to harness her power. I just wish there would have been some kind of inkling to about how Wit's powers are, because I really didn't get that throughout the novel. So the next book is something that I told you guys I was reading in my last 24-hour readathon, which is Insurgent by Veronica Roth, the second book in the Divergent trilogy. And holy crap, if you guys watched my 24-hour readathon, you will know how excited I was at the very end of that book, because I freaking freaked out. Oh my god, I love this book so much, and it was so well done. The novel was so well paced. There were so many twists and turns I was not expecting, and there was such a bigger focus on the political aspect of what was going on in the factions, which I so enjoyed, because although I'm not a huge fan of politics in general, politics in books is something that I really enjoy reading, because I like seeing the inner workings of especially a dystopian society. Like, I need to know what is going on to where these things are causing stuff to happen. And so I really enjoyed that. That was a big part of the story. Triss as a character, I feel, grew a lot in the story itself after the events of the first book, because we focus on her guilt a lot in terms of things that she did in the first book. And I really enjoyed that, because that brought her to a more humane level, I feel like. She's supposed to be the strong character having to face all these challenges, but she's still so fragile on the inside in terms of things that she's done and understanding the consequences of those things. And it's just such a humane thing that I think everyone would feel in that kind of a situation, when you realize you've done something so awful that it never leaves your head. And I felt myself really empathizing with Triss a lot in this novel, and I thought that that was such a great way to be able to empathize with her. There's also a huge pressure on the relationship of Triss and Four, which I really enjoyed, because there's a question of trust that is played into this kind of relationship, because there's a lot of going back and forth and going behind each other's back. It's an interesting strain. For some reason, I just really liked it, because I hate it when dystopian novels have relationships where the characters are so lovey-dovey and it's all rainbows and unicorns, and it's really not that. And especially in this kind of a scenario between Triss and Four, it really solidified the kind of environment that they are in, and what they have to do may not exactly be what the other person wants them to do in terms of what the plan is. I just really enjoyed that. I did, though, have a couple of problems with it, mostly in the choices of the characters. I didn't know how to feel about Peter throughout most of the novel, and I'm sure many of you who have read the whole series will know what I mean. I didn't know how to feel about him. I was so conflicted the whole book, because he's like good, and then he goes bad, and then he goes good again. I'm just like, I don't know how to feel about you. I don't know what to think of you. You're just a weird person in general. And then in terms of Four's dad, I also don't know how I feel about him, because I don't know if he's supposed to be helping Triss and Four, or if he's supposed to be trying to undermine them, and I just really don't know how to feel about them. I think it's more of like, I need to read the next book to see how they're going to contribute to the rest of the story in order for me to understand how I feel about them. Then also, as you guys know, I did read the fourth book in the Harry Potter series, Goblet of Fire, which I honestly enjoyed a lot more now than I thought I did when I was a kid. Like, I remember I did not care for Goblet of Fire as much when I was a kid. Like, I don't remember reading much of it except being really upset with a certain character who dies, which all of us know, but I really did enjoy it. I ended up giving it 5 stars. Again, in this book, we really see Harry really becoming vulnerable. We see a lot of his vulnerability and how scared he is to go through these Triwizard Trials, and it's terrifying, and you feel that terrifiedness in yourself as you're watching him go through all of this. And I really think the movie, oh my god, the movie. I hate the 4th movie so much, because they only focus on the Triwizard Trials when there's so much more that's involved in the story. We never in the movie see Harry actually be scared for once in his life. We've never seen that in the movies. Then there's a whole plot line with Hermione that's never mentioned. There's a lot more in the argument between Ron and Harry that is never mentioned. We see the house elves again, which means we see Dobby, and oh my god, I can't stand the movie. The book, though, is so good, because we really see a lot of different things, and we really see Hermione grow as a young woman too, because she's starting to be involved in relationships and how that affects other characters. I think it really starts to solidify the fact that these kids are growing into adults. I feel like the biggest thing, though, is that Harry, we really see, becomes vulnerable and he's scared, and I think that that really humanizes him, because he's, for the last 3 books, been seen as this chosen one person, and he's supposed to be this most popular guy in school who's supposed to be not afraid of anything because he's taken down Voldemort when he took over Professor Quirrell. He took down the Basilisk. He ended up saving Sirius Black and going up against the Dementors. He's supposed to be this badass guy when in reality, he is a scared 14-year-old kid. He doesn't know what the hell is going on at any point in this book, and I just loved that J.K. Rowling really humanized him for the first time in a long time in this novel. The only problem I have? Fuck Rita Skeeter. The next book I read is another audiobook, and this was called The Thing About Jellyfish by Ali Benjamin. This is a novel that I think is really hard to get through. It's a middle grade novel, but a lot of the themes that are involved in it are very, very young adult sounding because the story is about this 12-year-old girl who has just essentially found out that one of her old friends has passed away while on this vacation. She's essentially drowned, and this girl doesn't really know what exactly is going on. She really doesn't think that it was just a drowning accident because her friend was this amazing swimmer and she was able to ride waves in the ocean before and not have a problem. So she really doesn't think that her friend's just drowned. And after starting a school project involving jellyfish, the more research this girl does, she starts to think that her friend died by a jellyfish sting. This poor girl honestly goes through so much, and the story jumps between the present time as she's working on this project trying to find out more about these jellyfish to back in the past to show the progression of this friendship with this girl who eventually ends up really breaking her heart. I want to make a huge trigger warning for bullying. It's just, I really think that it's a good story for those of you who've been through bullying to read and understand that somebody else has been through that, or at least there's a fictional character that you can sympathize with. But also there's some very, very not graphic details, but really clear details of things that go on with her that I think could be triggering for a lot of people. Without further ado, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars, and it rightly deserves it because I thought it was so beautiful. I thought it was a really interesting story, and really the only problem I have was that sometimes it was a little unclear of when we were jumping back to the past as opposed to being in the present. That was really the only problem I had with it. Other than that, I thought the story was absolutely wonderful. I cried so many times reading it, and it's taking all my willpower right now to not cry about it because I loved it so much. And finally, the last book that I finished is my final audiobook for November, and that was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Now, this is the first time I've ever actually read Coraline. Like, I've never watched the movie, the cartoon. I had heard so much about the book growing up that it was dark and it was creepy, but I never read it. And so I listened to it on audiobook because it was super cheap on audiobook, and I gave it 4 stars, but I wasn't exactly sure how to describe it, so I'm going to read again the Goodreads description of it just because I don't really know how to explain the story of it. The day after they moved in, Coraline went exploring. In Coraline's family's new flat are 21 windows and 14 doors. 13 of the doors open and close. The 14th is locked, and on the other side is only a brick wall until the day Coraline unlocks the door to find a passage to another flat in another house just like her own. Only it's different. At first, things seem marvelous in the other flat. The food is better, the toy box is filled with wind-up angels that flutter around the bedroom, books whose pictures writhe and crawl and shimmer, little dinosaur skulls that chatter their teeth. But there's another mother and another father, and they want Coraline to stay with them and be their little girl. They want to change her and never let her go. Other children are trapped there as well, lost souls behind the mirrors. Coraline is their only hope of rescue. She will have to fight with all of her wits and all the tools she can find if she is to save the lost children, her ordinary life, and herself. I really did enjoy this novel. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to because it's for such a young audience. It's so creepy that I don't even understand how little kids were reading this when I was a little kid. Like, I never understood how people could read this, but it was so interesting. It was so weird. And it's an interesting idea to have this idea of escaping from your reality being in a sense bad because this other world was so dark and creepy, and it was actually a bad idea for Coraline to be in this world as opposed to her real world and her real life, which was more boring and uneventful. So it was an interesting kind of reason to like play on that idea of escaping reality being good and turning it on its head. The only thing that I had a problem with is there weren't really a lot of memorable scenes, but I still really did enjoy it for what it was. There you guys go. That is my very long-winded wrap up of the last several books that I have read over the course of the last month and a half or so. And I wanted to tell you guys that basically the one I am working on right now is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I've been actually working on this for like 3 weeks now, and I'm like trudging through it because unfortunately I'm in a really big reading slump because there's so many things that are going on right now with finals and preparing for the end of the year and just trying to get stuff taken care of. And honestly, I don't have the energy to read anymore, and unfortunately it's kind of come to that. But I am I would say about a third of the way through, so I hopefully will be finished with it in the next few weeks. But I've got a lot of books planned on my TBR that I'm probably never going to get to, but I think that my 24-hour readathon that I'll be doing this month will help a lot with that. So let me know if you guys have read any of these books before and your thoughts down in the comments below. And also let me know any other books that you think I should check out and that I could possibly read in the month of December. But anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!